Hello and welcome to R&R's Ask the Expert. I'm Kayla McGowan, Editor-in-Chief, and today our special guest is Rich Oakes. We're going to discuss how labor shortages can severely disrupt operations, service quality, and your overall business performance. Rich is the president of GigSmart, is an experienced operations leader with a deep experience and expertise in workforce solutions and strategic labor management. With a background in managing dynamic teams and optimizing staff strategies, Rich has helped businesses and industries ranging from restoration to technology, navigating complex staffing needs. As a passionate advocate for flexible labor models, he leverages his knowledge to drive efficiency, cost savings, and organizational growth. Rich is also a frequent speaker and writer on topics related to workforce issues and economy. Connecting him with LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of him. So without further ado, please welcome Rich Oakes.
Thanks so much, Kayla. I appreciate being included today. I'm enthusiastic to have this discussion with you.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I think we know that workforce has always been a challenge, but I think there's some changes coming our way that we know are going to change our economy greatly. But before we jump into that big topic that we're going to discuss, why don't you tell us how you got involved in the industry and, how did you come into this area of branching, making a business better and taking what we know is going on or where things are going in the economy to help businesses set themselves up for success?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So first of all, I was introduced to GigSmart from some prior partners that we were running a company, very successful company, exited that company, and they introduced the idea of GigSmart to me over breakfast at a Bob Evans in Cincinnati, Ohio. It literally was a idea on a 50-page Word document. And although the product today is wildly different and better and more sophisticated than it was on an idea on a piece of paper, I fell in love with the idea because over the years in different businesses and different industries, I was always had a staff, and one of the challenges of a staffing was the need for seasonal or temps. And I'll tell you, using what was traditionally available, what we call traditional staffing agencies, it was kind of a necessary evil. It was very slow. It was very expensive. And operationally, it just wasn't optimal. And so when I read the initial outline of GigSmart, I fell in love with it immediately and said, I want to be a part of this. And we started building it, launched it, and we're not where we want to be yet. I don't know any company that is, but it's to date been wildly successful, and we have over 3,000 companies using the product across all 50 states.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think most of our ideas in this space come from, breakfast or maybe at the bar. I think there's a saying in the industry, most business deals happen at the bar, and it's true, right? It's just one of those things. People talk amongst people and stuff comes into fruition, and I'm glad to see that it's blossomed the way that it has. So you kind of spoke about how this all came about, right? And how does this focus on the temporary and on-demand labor as a solution for our industry in particular, right? I think a lot of times people think that they have to find the seasoned person, or maybe they need to find somebody that's going to be there for 20 or 30 years. Can you explain that a little bit? I think that's really important for our business owners and even our managers to understand.
Yeah, no, it's great. So first of all, specifically for restoration, it is a very challenging, I don't have to tell you this, very challenging and historically a very challenging industry to staff for. Because any given day operationally, depending on the size of the organization and the size of the geo, the metro they're in, they may, normal operations may need 3, 4, 5 W-2 employees, or a larger organization, more sophisticated, may have dozens of employees or hundreds of employees. And that gets you through a typical day. But in restoration, there isn't a typical day every day. Quite honestly, there's not a typical day many days, okay? And so when disaster strikes, And I feel like nowadays we just have more of these than ever before, right? Or maybe it's more 24-hour news. We're just aware of them more often. Floods, fires, tornadoes, hurricanes. When disaster strikes, the need to staff up very quickly, not like in days, the need to staff up in hours is very urgent. And so that's what the gig economy allows the restoration industry to do. I can have what would be called a normal operational day with my two W-2 employees or 200 W-2 employees. And when disaster strikes or a certain job presents itself, and I need dozens within hours or hundreds within hours, some of the size and scopes of some of these events, I can flex up very quickly. And it's been a game changer because historically, you call a temp agency or you put an ad in the paper, and at best, you get people in days. It may take weeks. And with the
Yeah.
gig economy, you're getting people within hours.
I was gonna say, and those people know what this is all about, right? I think that's where the big difference is too, because like you said, when we're working with temp agencies or maybe newspaper or even word of mouth, like, hey, do you know so and so? You can end up with a variety of people, right? I just read something where somebody said, have you ever spent X amount of time looking at resumes only to come to the conclusion you were actually looking at a resume for a differently completely job? Like maybe they didn't understand the description, or maybe your description was a little too loose. And I think when we're in those desperate times of need, you don't have that time. Time is so valuable. And I think finding the right fit is already hard enough. Why would we want to struggle in that time of desperation? And, I think this also helps with the off season spikes, demands, and all of that. Can you explain how this can be so useful and how those who are doing temporary help, make our job easier as professionals in this space, right? I think a lot of times we think temporary is temporary, but do you see temporary workers becoming long-term based on this?
Yeah, what I see is, I think maybe the best way to phrase it is, first of all, the inarguable point is the gig economy, American workers embracing a more flexible work style. Okay, whether that is a gig worker, a consultant, a temp worker, it's a bunch of stuff falls in that bucket, right? It's one of the fastest growing parts of the labor market. So, do I think it's a fad? No, it continues to grow more and more generationally. More and more people want a flexible work model. And I think that there are some organizations, and I think there are some industries that are kind of old school and they are getting left behind. Because let's face it, back in the day, I'm a Gen Xer. I've worked for boomers most of my life, the boomer
Yeah.
generation. And the boomer generation that's a 60-hour a work week generation. You hired W-2 employees, and if you had to use a temp agency as a necessary evil, you did it. And that's just the way you did it, right? You just put a
Yeah.
job posting in, and now we've got this generation of workers that are saying, "Nah, I want more flexibility, Rich. I don't want to ask you for time off. I want more variety. I want to do this today. I want to do that tomorrow." And so, um, I would argue that if someone's not embracing this change in the labor market, okay, I didn't change the labor market. I mean, the
Yeah.
American workforce is changing the labor market. If someone doesn't embrace that, they're hurting their business and they're going to get left behind and become irrelevant. There are organizations that are like, I am perpetually understaffed, and they don't have to be because there are many, a growing number every year of gig workers across the country that want that shift across multiple industries, specifically in restoration. And we see that across the country with our clients.
Yeah, I think that's key too. You talk about shifts, right? We can't control them, they happen, and we have to be able to adjust to them. I think that's critical because most people in the space, especially the industries that you're talking about that are a little slower moving, they have a reactive, not a proactive approach. And frankly, we don't have that time. Yeah, it's scary to think about that way. And along with yourself, I've worked with a variety of generations, but I would definitely say, your boomers, like you said, temporary was very, very low on their list. And if it was one of those, I want to have a temp to hire situation. Don't just give me anybody. If you're going to throw me somebody, they need to be qualified.
Yeah.
Um,
And
you
let's
know,
say, and even when we take that W-2 approach, like I want them to be mine. I want to hire them in here. Okay, depending on what the turnover is in the organization, this is mind numbing when you think about it, right? When someone says, nope, they're going to be my W-2 employees. They're going to be an employer of record of this organization, right? My restoration company. And then they're turning them over every 54 days. They're turning them over every 80 days or every 90 days. Are they really yours, right? Because I mean,
yeah.
that same role has had three people in it over the past year. So they're not even accomplishing what they want to accomplish because the changes in the workforce, they're getting left behind. And so those who start to embrace more of a contingent labor strategy as one extra tool in their talent acquisition um, strategy, they're going to be further ahead and generate more revenue and have less turnover than those who don't.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I think we're going into where I want to go to next is really like the cost, right? We're talking about turnover internally, but there's cost associated with it. There's restarting your strategy, right? When you get new people in when they're W-2, they're starting the strategy over, right? They're all going to think about things differently. So what I know people oftentimes are like, oh, there's a cost associated with somebody that's temporary, right? I think we all have that subconsciously, if not consciously. So how do companies make sure that they're actually leveraging it properly in a cost effective way without really sacrificing the quality, right? Because I think sometimes, you
Sure.
know, cheap is not always the best.
Mm.
It's one of those things like buy it nice or buy it twice is kind of where we're going with that. So can you talk about that? I think it's important for people to understand the importance behind all of that, doing it properly, and it may not be cheap, but it could be cost effective if you utilize and leverage it the right way.
Yeah, so cost and quality. Let me hit quality first. So first, I do think there is an impression. I'm seeing less of it today because of the speed and growth of the gig economy and the labor market. But I think they're, especially, I don't know, 6, 10 years ago, I heard it a lot more. Well, they're just doing gig work because they can't get a real job. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, that is not the case. The research, the stats, and I'm not going to bore you with it. I could send you a million links. Gig workers are embracing the gig economy for a lot of different reasons, and it is not because they can't get a real job. These are very qualified people and very good at what they do, whether it is restoration type of work or other industries that we're in across the country. Um, they're wanting flexibility, freedom, variety, all those things. Okay, so that's the quality issue. And another part of that is in our technology solution, we build in a ratings and review structure. And what I've found is social proof that Rich, the worker, restoration worker on GigSmart, is really good. I've done, 200 shifts and I got 5-star ratings. That social proof is very valuable. So our businesses can rate workers and review them, and workers can rate businesses. The second part of this is cost. So because I know restoration so well, I'm going to ask those listening in the restoration space a couple questions. Okay. First of all, what's the cost when you pass up on projects 2 or 3 times this week or 5 times this month because you don't have the staffing to do them, right? That's what they're doing. They're passing on projects because I don't have the people to do it. That's costing a lot. The second part of that is what's the cost, because there's others on the other side of the spectrum, because we work with them today and we found them like this, okay, where they're overstacked. They're carrying extra headcount, extra cost, prepping for something that they know will happen at some point, but it hasn't happened yet. So the real question is, hey, what's the cost of passing on extra revenue because you don't have the people to do it? And what's the cost of carrying too many people and not having anything for them to do because you're waiting for the next disaster? So the gig economy, embracing the gig economy, allows an organization to accomplish, from a labor perspective, extreme operational efficiencies. I can flex up and down within hours based on my labor need. It's a perfect match. I have a client here in Colorado, and we had a call. It's been about 5, 6 months ago. He's worked with GigSmart several years now, and he said, I tripled my revenue this year by leveraging the gig economy, because the prior year I was passing on business that I couldn't staff to get it done. And so, what's the cost of doing the same thing you've been doing and struggling? What's the cost of placing another ad in ZipRecruiter and LinkedIn and failing to close business because you can't staff it? I think the cost is significant, and it's a steal, operational efficient steal, to be able to leverage up headcount and cost based on needs, with a worker pool who wants to work like that. This is what they're choosing. And so, you've got, it's a match made in heaven. You've got operational needs that want to be flexible, and you got an American workforce increasingly saying, I want more flexibility. It's a win-win for both parties.
I would definitely say too, in this day and age, I think we're starting to see a lot of people choose that family time or that personal time. And they may be exceptional at what they do, but they want that flexibility, like you're talking about. And what better way to find somebody that is a professional or maybe even an expert in their space that wants the flexibility, but they can help you in the times of need. Or maybe that ends up being your go-to, right? At the end of the day, like, oh, we know we can go to that person if we need to. So
Yeah.
speaking of cost, I think you said something that really just stuck in my mind was, using the ads and using, all these external resources. It's like, slapping some tape on a leak, right? You're like, it might work for like a day or two, but like it's going to serve its purpose. Whereas this gig economy that we're speaking about allows you to do it strategically, but also with the best interest of your business in mind, right? That's what really sets this all apart. And like you said, these people want to work this type of work.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing I think we struggle with in the workforce in totality. People are working because they have to most of the time, not because they want to. And so I think that this takes that aspect and just really makes it easier for, let's be honest, our industry that really struggles with workforce. We've seen it over the years, and I think this last year really proved that, right? And you mentioned overstaffing. No one wants to admit they have an overstaffing problem, right? Because that means layoffs, and no one wants to be that boss. So I think you touching on that, where in a matter of hours, you can flux the way you need to flux if needed. That's also long term beneficial for their business, not just in the now, which I think is extremely important for people to understand. Even if gig economy or even temp scares you, it really shouldn't if you're utilizing something like GigSmart, right? You're placing the right bodies in the right seats. Um, so what are some misconceptions? I think you kind of talked about them a little bit, but maybe particular in our space and like how do we address them properly, right? I think that's really important because they can be addressed, but it doesn't mean they're being addressed properly.
Yeah, so we discussed one misconception. Hey, gig workers, they're doing gig work because they can't find a real job. Not true. Data doesn't support that. I think another one I see in restoration and construction quite a bit is, it probably isn't I guess it is a misconception. But it's definitely a we think that someone is either full-time or they need to retire. Okay.
Mhm.
And I know so many people, they're in the gig economy now because they're on GigSmart. Okay. Where they've been in restoration, they've been in construction. Let's pretend Joe has been doing it for 30 years. Joe's highly talented. He knows the space. He's worked for several brands in the space. But Joe just wakes up one day, he's been doing it a long time, and says, man, I don't want to work 40, 50 hours a week anymore. So I want to retire. So what do these companies do? The old school companies that aren't embracing the gig economy, they say, oh, Joe, are you sure you want to retire? We hate to lose you. Okay, but Joe says, no, I'm tired of working 50, 60 hours a week. And they throw a retirement party for Joe, and he takes off. Well, most people, when they retire, aren't saying, I want to retire and do nothing.
Yeah.
Most people are saying, I'm freaking exhausted from working 50, 60 hours a week. I just want to do less. So then Joe jumps out there and jumps on a gig app. And now he's doing restoration for your competitor 1, 2 days a week, right? In the gig economy, or whenever he wants to do it when things pop up, right? Because he's seeking flexibility. Joe didn't say, I don't want to work. He's like, I want to retire from you working me to death 40, 50, 60 hours a week. So I think
Yeah.
one of the misconceptions is, well, I got to have them full time or nothing. And there are many, an increasing number of organizations embracing the gig economy, realizing if I can build a pool, okay, if I've got my restoration company in Houston, Texas, and I can build a pool of 2025 Joes, okay,
Yeah.
and any given day, they've been in and out. I've liked them, they like me. We've rated each other. And any given day, when I need an extra five, six, seven hands on deck, five, six, or seven of those Joes are jumping in, or Marys are jumping in to help out. That's the beauty of the gig economy. And so I think that along with the quality of worker, along with, you can get a lot done with a pool of Joes and Marys, and they don't have to be permanent W-2 employees of that organization. They can be, depending on the regulatory environment of that state or local city, could be a W-2 worker off the gig platform.
Yeah, I think you hit something really important too, right? It's not that most people who are retiring are tired of it and they want like a free time. They're burnt out. Let's be completely honest here. This is an industry that does get burnt out. I mean, we work when we work very hard. And I think that's the realization too. Would you rather have somebody for maybe 1 or 2 days that's performing at their top capacity? Or would you rather have somebody 5, 6, even 7 days a week giving you 25%? I think
Yeah.
that's a big realization as well. So with all of this, I know there's a technology element, right? Our industry is not the slowest with implementing technology, but I think sometimes it can be a little scary. Um, so can you kind of just walk us through how GigSmart's platform works and makes the process of staffing somebody simple and efficient? Because I think that's important too. Ease of use and quality are extremely important in this space. So can you give a little bit of detail about that?
Yeah. So it's got to be easy, because if it's not, people won't use it over and over again, right? And it's got to consistently deliver what they're looking for. Now, keep in mind, at GigSmart, we've built some very slick technology that's fast and very cost effective compared to traditional staffing. Um, with that being said, though, we haven't cured the human spirit, right? Every now and then, Johnny or Mary could have done 200 gigs, 5 stars, and maybe they're just having a bad day, right? We have every person listening to this with a staff and an organization that runs a company says, hey, Mary showed up, Joe showed up, and they're just having a tough day. Something happened at home, the kids, right, right. So there is a human element. These are people, right? So it is not the cure for staffing cancer, but it is a very powerful tool. What we do is we have a very easy interface to use. Ultimately, our business users have um, two actions they need to take once we set up the account, which is takes a few minutes. They create a shift or series of shifts. I need 8 people from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. the next 2 weeks for cleanup here, right? So that's the first step. And then the second step, the technology does all the work looking for the workers in the area closest to the gig address, highest ratings in the reviews, most success historically in these types of roles, restoration roles, construction roles, things like that. So that's the technology. And then the second thing the business user does is they kind of finalize what we call internally the time card, where they say, hey, Mary was here from 9 to 3, rate and review. And then the technology, obviously, the next time I post, it's offering all the highest rating and reviewed workers that worked with me last time first. So the technology does most of the work. So very quick, very easy. We have an account management team that's assigned to every one of our users to help them and kind of hold their hand as they get started. Usually 99% of the time, quick walkthrough and they're off and running. It's If it were a hard process, the stickiness would be an issue, and that's just not an issue for us.
Yeah, that's refreshing to hear too, because I think, we if we're talking about all the platforms that are out there, all the temp agencies and all that stuff, I think you've said some really great things that actually stand out to me because I'm thinking, wow, you're not only leveraging technology and rating, you're also the next time I have a job, you're already doing half the battle for me. You're saying, hey, these are the people you've worked with and they're available, right? So then you also build that rapport and that trust. I think that's the other thing. A lot of times when you're using temps or those who are based on gig by gig basis, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to build that trust and you're just like, oh, it's another body. But I think utilizing your guys' technology, it allows you to not have that approach, right? You're like, maybe the first time it's like, oh, we're filling them out. But then you're like, man, this person was really great. Like you said, like Joe was really great, and the next time he comes in, maybe he does have a bad day, but you've already had that run in with him. That's a great one. And I think maybe at that point, you'd be like, you know what? We're all human, right? I think that's the other thing. There is a human aspect to everything that we do. And just because we do have technology like this doesn't mean that we don't have that humanization aspect. And that's really important for people to remember too, because we all have bad days. What if they come in and it's a bad day for you, right? How do you think they would
Sure.
want to rate you at the end of that day?
I Yeah. Yeah, you were too nice to temp agencies. That's exactly what they do. They throw new faces at you continuously. I could work with the same temp agency for 6 months and I'm just getting pelted with new faces. And there's no muscle memory, there's no relationship, there's no nothing. And so what we provide is a technology that allows our users to build a pool. I always tell people, don't bet on the person. Okay, individual people turn over, right? I mean, think about W-2 employees in an industry, an hourly industry of $15 to $25 an hour, depending on the geo and the average wage and things like that. Turnover happens a lot, right? And
Yeah.
so if I build a pool of 50 favorites any given day, when I need another 5, 10, or 20, I get a lot of familiar faces, a lot of muscle memory. There's a relationship there, and both parties win, the business and the gig worker.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that too. I think you just mentioned it, and this is where my mind goes immediately when we're talking about like disasters or, maybe there's a large loss or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a disaster, but can you maybe talk about some actual examples that you've seen where this has played a huge role and what impact it had, right? So I think maybe if Milton or Helene, there's maybe an example there, right? We needed boots on the ground now, not 2 days, not 3 days, not a week, not a month. We needed them now. How did this, make an impact, right, for the better? I think there's some great success here.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. So, thinking of, I can think of over 100. I mean, literally, especially it's fresh in my mind from the last couple of months. I mean, it was very common and has been very common. I don't think there's any disasters going on today. I haven't turned on the news, but I'm not hearing it in the business, and we usually do pretty quick.
Yeah.
Um, Over the last couple of months, for restoration companies, construction companies to literally get on the platform. One in particular is top of mind. I'm thinking of right now, just south of Tampa, I believe, an hour or so south of Tampa, and literally said, "I need 8 people now." And I've called everywhere. I've called the biggest staffing agencies in the country. No one can help me. And what's neat about this is you think about gig workers are workers on the platform in the very community impacted by the disaster, whether it's a
Yeah.
tornado or a flood, or I mean, it's not like I'm flying people in from Toledo, right? Like, these are gig workers an hour south of Tampa or wherever it was, right? So what's fascinating is we said, hey, we can help you. Let's set up your account. Let's get this posted immediately. And within 2 hours, we had 8 people on site working. So not only from a staffing operational business perspective, is that just cool, but the human element of it. These are 8 people that I don't know what their life looked like the last 24 hours. They probably
Yeah.
got flooded stuff and things like that too, but they're jumping on and helping through the gig app, um, in their very own community that's trying to get back on its feet. There's just
Yeah.
something that I find from a human perspective pretty beautiful about that. Um, and yet at the business operational perspective, really cool too. And so I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too much about it, but I just think that's neat. And we do that hundreds of times, thousands, tens of thousands of times over the years, any given event. If a fire happens today, our phones light up and people are jumping on and doing work to help get the community back on their feet.
I think you said something really important there, and this is something that I talk about fairly often. People in the same space that know the conditions that they're in. But not only that, most people in our space would rather take care of our customers first and worry about their loss or situation later. I think that's one thing that's extremely important. And that example you just gave is perfect because, like you said, you didn't know what their life was like 24 hours ago, heck, even 5 hours ago. You don't know what it's
Mhm.
like, but they jumped at the opportunity to help. And I think that's the biggest thing. We're in a service industry, and for people to just, in a matter of, you know, not even, 3, 4, 5 hours, they were like, yeah, sign me up. I'm ready. I'm here. Right. And let's mention that they're qualified people. Right. So, can you talk a little bit about that and how you get these specialized workers and have the right certifications or maybe handling knowledge and things like that? I think that's really important, especially in places like Florida where they have a lot of water and mold. But then you have California, right? You have that other extreme of fire, but then there is water mixed into it. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, many roles we consistently see are, general labor types of roles. And so the social vetting for roles like that, the ratings and reviews in the app are a great tool. Um, as skill set increases, so if I'm running a restoration company and I need someone with licensing or certification in something more skilled, the way we've built the technology is we have many, I won't say everything, but I'll tell you, very rarely do we have someone ask us to add something else because we've got a very robust set of certifications. Sometimes you mentioned they change by state, they could change by city sometimes. So we have those certifications built into our platform. And our clients can, when they create the shift, they can list a whole bunch of stuff like certifications needed. They can write down to what to wear, what not to wear, right? Like all this, all the requirements of the shift or the gig or the gig series, right? If I want someone to, I need your help the next 2 weeks or whatever. The worker then goes in, they review that, and they have to digitally attest that they meet the qualifications. And upon arrival at the gig site, they can even take a picture. The functionality is built in. They can take a picture of that mold certificate or whatever certificate, put it in there in their gig profile, so the requester can see it. Or upon arriving, they can show it. So we build that into the technology. One of the ways to keep this fast, because one of the key components is speed here, right? That's a huge differentiator. When I need people for disaster, I can call a major temp agency and get me people in 3 or 4 days, but I need them now. Is we want to try to solve as many of these problems through technology. So we've done it. Our attempt at solving that problem, and it works really well, is building those qualifications in the gig, having workers attest to them, and giving the business user access and visibility to that before they get them started working.
Yeah, I think you touch on something extremely important as far as like quality, reliability. That's always a concern, but I think you just mentioned some key systems that are in place, right? They're signing off before they ever set foot in your space, right? They're they're showing their credibility and responsibility as somebody. And if they happen to not show up properly, you already have something that says, well, hey, you agreed to this, right? Like, and I
Right.
think that's oftentimes when we think about disaster and on all of that, you most times feel like, man, we need bodies. And I think that this sets that tone that's like, hey, you're not just getting bodies, you're getting like
Yeah.
abled, well certified. Maybe they have X years of experience and things like that. It's not just one of those fill the seats mentalities, which I think is extremely important, right?
Yeah. So yeah, just base another other basic things like, hey, you got to be able to lift 50 pounds, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
pretty core requirement in this industry. And so I'm 6'3", 235. I'm a beefy guy. But if I were, you know, 6'3" and 110, I probably could lift 50 pounds, right? So it's not the gig for me. So even at the most basic level, we try to build that into the technology. It's clear for the worker that's applying. It's clear expectations from the business user using the technology, and it really works well if everyone knows what the requirements are up front, whether it be the basic. requirements or more technical requirements with regards to certifications.
Yeah, I think that's really key to understanding the requirements before you get there because I think we've all maybe had that instance where maybe we've gone in and worked a temp job or whatever and you have an idea and you think it's one thing and you get there and then you walk in and you're like, hmm, maybe not. Maybe this and it's
Yeah,
like, well, I'm already here. Like, do I fulfill the first day and just like say like, hey, this is it for me? It's so awkward. And I think that pre notion of understanding what you're walking into is huge, especially in this space in particular, right? If you have qualifications that have to be met, you're setting up these people for success, not
yeah.
failure. And I think that's a huge, huge thing to talk
Yeah,
about.
I won't get detailed and gross on the podcast, but I'll tell you, the restoration industry has some pretty gross gigs, right? And so, unless you're really like, especially like sewer pipes bursting and things like that, right? You got to be really clear up in advance, because if you're not, and people are showing up, zipping up in a suit, crawling under places, and digging out. Gross dirt with a shovel or a bucket, and they don't know it before they got there, it's not going to go well. So yeah, it doesn't hurt to be extra clear, have expectations out, and that's what we try to do, and we leverage our technology to do that, and it helps with parties.
Yeah, I was gonna say you are right. We handle some pretty gross stuff in this space, not just sewer line. I mean, there's biohazard. I mean,
Yeah,
there's all
yeah,
these
yeah,
things
sure.
that we handle, right? And the last thing you want to do is get on a job and all of a sudden realize my stomach can't handle this, or hey, I didn't know I was
Yeah,
signing up to be,
yeah,
knee deep in sewage. Um,
yeah.
you know, it's just it's one of those things again, setting this person up for success and your company up for success in the long run, right? I think that's important. You're able to see into the future and not just be reactive, right? This is a proactive approach. I think that it's an appreciative approach because this is proactive. It's well thought out. There's expectations. Again, not the body in the seats mentality, right? So speaking of all of this and this gig economy, just it's taking off. I think we're realizing that our lives are in a different space, right? Gig working is one of the fastest growing things in the space right now. So, what trends do you kind of see happening now that may shape the demand in the future? With not just maybe within our space, but just as a whole, right? Do you think this is going to really take off even more than it already has?
Yeah, I think that the gig economy continues to grow year over year. Um, the American workforce has spoken. They want the gig economy. They love the flexibility at an increasing level. I think that businesses want the gig economy at an increasing level. There's a lot of old school businesses still trying to get their arms around it, trying to figure out, how do I embrace this thing? What do I do? What is it? All that stuff. And that's why I try to speak and make myself available when someone have questions. And so I think it's going to continue to thrive. Now, based on the part of the country that someone's in or their business is in and where they're operating, maybe they should embrace a gig model where there's an employer of record solution where the gig workers are W-2s. They may have the flexibility to embrace a gig model where the gig workers are actually 1099 independent contractors by geo or by region based on local guidance. But these are all things that are developing and shaking out. And um, it is, I think it's going to continue to grow at a blockbuster pace. We see it. More and more companies year over year are embracing it. And it's going to continue being one of the fastest parts of the labor market, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. I think probably since COVID, I would definitely say people are in that mentality, right? Things have really changed since 2020, and I think year over year it can progressively change because then you hear that word of mouth, right? Oh, I do this and I've done this, and all it takes is that. I mean, word of mouth is so powerful. That's ultimately what led to all of this change, I'm pretty sure, is that word of mouth, right? So speaking of change, I know that every every year we meet a roadblock, I guess is the nicest thing to say as far as workforce. And so how do we see situations like being impacted by administration changes or maybe influx of maybe uh, what's the word I'm looking for? like investors coming in too, right? I think that also has the same effect of people buying up businesses and things like that. What do you see and how do you see that impacting our industry?
Yeah, I got to tell you, Kayla, and like you said, we said we're gonna keep this podcast real. I'm not that smart when it comes to forecasting the future. I can tell you that um, we all do our best, and the incoming administration and how that's going to impact labor. I think I'm reading about it daily. I think that what I'm reading about from the smart people out there, I'm simple rich over here. I think there's probably going to be a change in the regulatory environment. I think people are expecting less regulation, not just in labor, but in a lot of different industries. So we'll see how that shakes out and the impact it has on the labor market. We continue to see a tremendous amount of investment dollars from VC, PE, and even strategics trying to get their arms around the gig economy. And they're saying, "Hey, this thing's growing really fast, and how do I get a piece of this and monetize on it and so forth?" So I think um, regulatory environment is going to go through some shifts. What that looks like, man, I have no idea, but to be determined. And I think there will continue to be a lot of capital flowing into the gig economy, which will fuel competition, which is good, and the adoption of it across the country.
Yeah, and I would definitely say too, it's like it's a healthy competition, right? I think that is what makes our industry better at the end of the day. Competition is always beneficial. I think it's friendly at that point, right? You're pushing each other to another level of success. And sometimes it's rolling up your sleeves, and sometimes it's actually doing the person next to you is doing a little bit better, right? That's the nature of the beast that we're in, you know. So if there's anybody out here listening, thinking about getting into this world of having, the gig economy be kind of an arm of their business, what do you recommend? How do they get started, and how do they set themselves up for success, right? I think we're in this world where technology is at our fingertips and sometimes it can actually lead you down the wrong path.
Mhm. Yeah, so I would give them the following tips. And I'm a free consultant. So if someone hits me up on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy to answer questions. And you never have to use GigSmart, although I think we're a premier service in the space. First thing is they want to lean into a gig solution that is technologies first. Okay. Once again, it's it's about finding people, good people when you need them, really fast. Okay. If speed isn't a component, hey, find me a good person in 3 weeks. Well, fine. You throw it on a job board, okay, like you always have. But the gig economy, we find there's a significant speed component. So number one, technology first solution. Number two is they need to find a solution that has a very robust suite of insurance products, right? And so whether it's W-2 gig workers or 1099 gig workers, there are some insurance questions they need to ask. And if they're like, "Hey, what are those questions?" Send me a message. I'll help you and coach you on the questions. Third, you they need to look at a platform that has robust vetting. Okay, so things built in like um, background checks. Okay, not as applicable in restoration, but motor vehicle record checks, depending on roles, right? Things like that. Drug testing, depending on the contracts, could come into play, right? So vetting, all of that is built into our platform. Okay, and to work with a platform without those sorts of tools, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's someone can decide for them. And then the fourth and final thing is understand the regulatory environment of their local jurisdictions, whether it's a city, a county, a state. Um, Maybe a W-2 gig solution is best for them. Okay,
Yeah.
maybe a 1099 gig solution is best for them. That's going to heavily be determined by regulatory guidance locally. And so those are really the four tips I give them. Those are high level things that I need to understand these before I move forward.
Yeah.
And once they understand those, there are great solutions out there that will make them very operationally efficient and increase their revenue by leaning into the gig economy.
Yeah, I think you said it best, right? There's a little bit of research and accountability in this, right? to understand and answer important questions to not only set themselves up for success or set their partner up for success, right? Because ultimately, if someone partners with GigSmart, it's just that setting each other up for success. And I think that's one thing that we really need to take into consideration when we're making these big business decisions. So you did give some great advice on what they need to do, but what if somebody's like still really hesitant? You know, how do they navigate that on-demand labor? I think one way is by reaching out to somebody like yourself, right? But what are some other ways that they can research or, kind of get rid of that hesitation that they're feeling?
Well, that's very hard. Changing human behavior is very hard. I mean, when you think
Yeah.
about, we all know people in our life that we love dearly who, had an addiction and they couldn't change, and we've lost loved ones. So I always tell our team and our business development team, and now I'll tell you, you know, selling someone is virtually, I think, impossible. To change a human behavior, they've got to want to change. So, I think that what I would say is if someone's like, hey, I'm not getting enough business, or I'm getting a lot of business and I'm losing money because of labor costs,
Yeah.
right? My business isn't where I want to be, and it's heavily driven by labor cost and or lack of business because I don't have enough staffing. I would, I don't think there's anything I'm going to say or do to put them over the edge. I think they really got to do it. Do it. I'm kind of corny. I have some sayings. Look in the mirror and do a checkup from the neck up, and say, hey,
Yeah.
do I want to stay relevant in my space, grow my business, help my community, and do some good, or do I want to stay where I'm at with a bad strategy, lose relevance in a labor market and talent acquisition strategy that's not working, and let my business die? That's really the choice. And there's nothing I'm going to be able to do or say to help them. I'm a big believer that people got to help themselves, and when it
Yeah.
hurts bad enough, a lot of times we'll make a change. And so it's the best advice I got. I'm sorry.
No, I think that was great advice because I think a lot of this falls back on the people that are putting in these plans into motion, right? I like the checkup from the neck up because I think it's true. You really control your destiny and where things go, right? And if you haven't taken that time to really hold yourself accountable, that's a huge thing because I think sometimes we're human. We always go into something with a predetermined mindset, right? And so like you said, selling is ultimately impossible if they already have this thing in their mind. But if you're seeing, like you said, a decrease in business or having to pass up business, I mean, who's at the root of the problem here? I think it's a huge self-reflection moment.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing, right? You can have all the tools and all the things, but if you can't self-reflect, those really don't matter, to be completely honest. So to wrap this all up, I think one thing I'm curious about, and I'm sure those who are listening are very curious about, are, what do you see in the future for the restoration space, and how does this workforce model help evolve us in the next? I know it's going to be evolve us in the next year, but how about the next 5, maybe 10 years? I know it's really hard to look into that crystal ball, but I think we can kind of see some patterns that have already, been established. What do you think in there?
Yeah, no, I believe so. First of all, the restoration business is going to continue to grow. It's just where we're at in the life cycle of the climate and the way things are playing out. So obviously very, very hot space that has a very bright future. I think the gig economy within restoration construction is in its infancy when it comes to adoption. We are seeing very high adoption rates internally, but when you look at all the players in the space across the entire country, it's in its infancy. And we get new referrals sometimes daily, weekly. And so I believe more and more people are going to recognize that, hey, to compete in today's labor market, nothing frustrates me more than talking to a business owner when they first call in, and I'll sit in on some calls. They're like, and they blame their staffing challenges on this generation. Okay, And I listen, and then I have to politely tell them that the staffing challenges aren't this generation, it's them. Okay. That they are becoming irrelevant. They're not changing with the trends, and they need to really analyze their talent acquisition strategies because there's more than one.
Yeah.
The gig economy is a key one. And I think more and more people are doing that, and we're going to see that. And the two gig economy restoration are going to work together more and more across the country over the next 5, 10 years.
I think that's huge. I think, again, self-reflection, understanding, not pointing the blame. I think that's a huge point and pain point really in our space. Accountability is ultimately what it comes down to. And sometimes you have to be told, hey, let's pause. Maybe you should understand where the true problem is. And and that's okay. That's the cost of doing business, is having to be humbled every now and again, right? So I really appreciate you taking time out of your day today to talk about this. I think it's something that is not talked about enough. I look forward to maybe checking in with you again later down in 2025 and kind of see where things have gone and questions you may have received. So again, I appreciate you. Thank you. And as always, until next time on Ask the Expert, we will see you then. Take care.